Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, two of the biggest names in Hollywood history. On screen, they were the perfect comedy duo, cracking jokes, improvising gags, and making audiences laugh for decades. Their legendary road to films cemented them as one of the greatest pairings in entertainment. But behind the scenes, the story wasn't so lighthearted. What the cameras didn't capture was a rivalry fueled by competition, jealousy, and personal differences. Hope and Crosby played best friends in the movies, but in real life, their relationship was far more complicated. Resentment, clashing egos, and icy silences painted a very different picture from the one Hollywood sold to the world. Tonight, we uncover the truth. This is the untold story of Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, the comedy kings whose laughter masked a bitter feud. Before he was a household name, before he was cracking jokes on stage, and long before he became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, Bob Hope was just a kid from England with a dream, one that seemed almost impossible. Born Leslie Towns Hope in the small town of Eltham, London, in 1903, his early life was far from glamorous. His father, a stonecutter, struggled to find steady work, and his mother, a former opera singer, did everything she could to keep the family afloat. But life in England was tough, and the Hopes, like so many others, looked toward America as the land of opportunity. In 1908, when Bob was just 4 years old, his father left for the United States, hoping to build a better future. A year later, his mother and 6 brothers followed, traveling in third class on a crowded steamship. They arrived at Ellis Island with little more than hope itself. Settling in Cleveland, Ohio, the family faced the same struggles they had hoped to escape. They lived in cramped conditions, barely making ends meet. His mother took in boarders to help pay the bills, and his father's job as a stonemason never brought in much. But while life was hard, young Bob found something that kept him going: laughter. He was a natural entertainer, mimicking accents, telling jokes, and making people smile wherever he went. His mother, recognizing his gift, encouraged him to develop his talent, teaching him to sing and pushing him toward performance. At just 10 years old, Hope got his first taste of the spotlight. He entered a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest at an amusement park in Cleveland, and won. That moment, standing in front of an audience, hearing their laughter, changed everything. He loved the thrill of performance, but at that time, entertainment wasn't his main focus. As a teenager, he bounced between odd jobs, selling newspapers, shining shoes, working as a soda jerk, anything to help support the family. He even tried his hand at boxing, fighting under the name Packy East, inspired by the famous boxer Packy McFarland. He was scrappy, quick on his feet, and tough enough to win a few matches. But as he later joked, he spent more time on the canvas than Picasso. Despite his love for the ring, comedy was always calling, and soon he found himself chasing a different kind of spotlight: the stage. Hope's first real attempt at performing came in the world of vaudeville, a fast-paced variety show style of entertainment that was hugely popular in the early 20th century. It wasn't an easy path. He started small, performing at tiny clubs and theaters, often for little pay. His early acts were rough around the edges, but he was determined. He studied the greats, learning the art of timing, delivery, and audience interaction. He teamed up with various performers in those early years, first with Mildred Rosequist, then with Lloyd Durbin, and later George Byrne. Each partnership helped him sharpen his skills, but his real breakthrough came when he found a style that was uniquely his own. While most vaudeville comedians stuck rigidly to their routines, Hope developed a more spontaneous approach. He played off the audience, adjusted his jokes in real time, and brought a natural energy to his performances. By the late 1920s, his persistence was paying off. He started landing bigger gigs, gaining a reputation as a sharp, fast-talking comic. Then, in the 1930s, radio changed everything. Hope's wit and quick delivery were perfect for the airwaves. He began getting small radio jobs, but his big break came in 1938 when he was offered the lead role in the Pepsodent show. It was a game-changer. Broadcast nationwide, the show quickly became one of the most popular radio programs in America. Hope's brand of humor, self-deprecating, topical, and rapid-fire, was fresh and exciting. He wasn't just telling jokes, he was reinventing comedy for a new era. Within months, he was a household name. His monologues became must-hear entertainment, his guest stars were the biggest names in Hollywood, and his signature comedic style was influencing an entire generation of performers. From a struggling immigrant to the king of radio comedy, Bob Hope had made it. But this was only the beginning. Hollywood was calling, and soon he would take his talents from the airwaves to the silver screen, where he would meet the man who would change his career forever, Bing Crosby. By the mid-1930s, Bob Hope was one of the most recognizable voices on the radio. But in Hollywood, he was just another hopeful comic trying to make a name for himself. His first real shot at film came in 1934 with Going Spanish, a forgettable short comedy that even Hope himself later mocked. When they showed it in theaters, people went home speaking English, he quipped. It was hardly the breakthrough he had hoped for. For a few years, he took whatever roles he could get, but his big break finally arrived in The Big Broadcast of 1938. It wasn't just another film, it introduced him to the song that would define his career. Thanks for the Memory, a bittersweet duet he performed with Shirley Ross, became an instant hit. It captured something different. Hope wasn't just a comedian. He had charm, warmth, and an ability to connect with audiences on a personal level. The song became his signature tune, and overnight, Bob Hope was a legitimate movie star. His unique comedy style set him apart. He wasn't the traditional leading man. He was quick-witted, fast-talking, and completely self-aware. He wasn't afraid to make himself the punchline, constantly poking fun at his own looks, his bravado, or the idea that he could ever be a serious romantic lead. Audiences loved it. Hollywood had plenty of suave, confident heroes. Bob Hope gave them something new, the wisecracking underdog. And then came Road to Singapore, the movie that would change everything. Released in 1940, the film was originally just another light-hearted adventure comedy. But when Hope was paired with Bing Crosby, something incredible happened. From the first day on set, they threw out the script, improvising lines, cracking jokes at each other's expense, and breaking the fourth wall with ease. It was chaotic, unscripted, and completely different from anything else on screen. And audiences loved it. The chemistry between them was undeniable. Crosby, the smooth and confident crooner, played the effortless charmer. Hope, the wisecracking coward, was always one step behind. And caught in the middle? Dorothy Lamour, the beautiful leading lady who was constantly the object of their competing affections. The formula was simple, but it worked. The film was a massive success, and Paramount wasted no time turning it into a franchise. Over the next 2 decades, The Road to series became one of the most beloved comedy film collections of all time. Road to Zanzibar, Road to Morocco, Road to Utopia. Each film followed the same structure: exotic locations, catchy musical numbers, ridiculous plot lines, and non-stop banter. But the real magic wasn't in the scripts. It was in Hope and Crosby's rapid-fire improvisation. Off-screen, however, things weren't quite as harmonious. Despite their on-screen camaraderie, Bing Crosby never truly saw Bob Hope as his equal. While Hope idolized Crosby's effortless cool, Crosby dismissed Hope's comedic style as lowbrow. More than once, he privately referred to Hope as a talentless hack. Then there was the issue of money. Crosby had been a star long before Hope, and early on, he made nearly twice as much for their road to films. Hope, always conscious of his worth, refused to accept being second tier. By 1947, he renegotiated his contract to earn the same as Crosby, something that didn't sit well with Bing. But the rivalry extended beyond money. Hope and Crosby weren't friends outside of work. While they appeared inseparable on screen, their personal lives never overlapped. Their wives never socialized. They rarely spent time together off-set. And when Hope was honored at the prestigious Friars Club roast, Crosby didn't even show up. When asked why, he simply shrugged. "I wasn't hungry." Still, they were professionals, and if they resented each other behind the scenes, they never let it show in public. In interviews, they maintained their legendary back-and-forth banter. Hope would say, "There's nothing I wouldn't do for Bing, and there's nothing he wouldn't do for me." And that's exactly how we go through life, doing nothing for each other. The humor masked the reality. While their films suggested a deep friendship, the truth was much more complicated. Hope and Crosby were two of the biggest stars in Hollywood, but their partnership was built on business, not brotherhood. And despite all the laughter, their competitive nature and underlying resentment were always just beneath the surface. Still, the road to films cemented their legacy, making them one of the most iconic duos in Hollywood history. But as time went on, cracks in their partnership would only grow wider. And soon, the golden age of Hope and Crosby would start to fade. By the early 1940s, Bob Hope wasn't just a radio and film star, he had become the voice of America's laughter. But his greatest legacy wouldn't be found in Hollywood. It would be forged in the war zones, jungles, and deserts, where soldiers desperately needed a reason to smile. In 1941, just months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Hope took the stage at March Field in California to perform for servicemen. It was the first time he had played to an audience of soldiers, but it wouldn't be the last. That night, something changed. He realized his comedy wasn't just entertainment. It was a lifeline. When war broke out, Hope took his act overseas, bringing humor to the front lines of World War II. From the battlefields of Europe to the islands of the Pacific, he performed under conditions most Hollywood stars would never dare face. Makeshift stages, bombed-out airstrips, scorching heat, freezing winters. None of it mattered. If there were troops who needed a break from war, Bob Hope was there. His commitment didn't end with World War II. He was there for soldiers in Korea, in Vietnam, and even in the Gulf War. He flew into dangerous war zones, dodging sniper fire, performing while enemy shells exploded in the distance. The troops loved him because he wasn't just a comedian. He was one of them. He understood their struggles, he spoke their language, and, for a few hours, he made them forget the horrors around them. Hope's dedication was so profound that in 1997, the U.S. Congress awarded him a title no entertainer had ever received before: Honorary Veteran of the United States Armed Forces. It was, in his own words, the greatest honor of his life. But even as he traveled the world performing for soldiers, Hope never lost his grip on Hollywood. When television became the next big thing in entertainment, he didn't hesitate to seize the opportunity. In 1950, he hosted Star-Spangled Review, a variety show that brought his signature comedy to a brand new audience. Unlike many radio stars who struggled to transition to TV, Hope thrived. His quick wit, His ability to deliver monologues and his effortless stage presence made him a natural for the small screen. Over the next 4 decades, he would go on to host more than 300 television specials, many of which became some of the most watched broadcasts of their time. His influence didn't just shape variety shows, it helped lay the foundation for late-night television as we know it. Johnny Carson, David Letterman, Jay Leno, all of them borrowed from Hope's format of opening monologues filled with rapid-fire jokes about current events. But the most beloved part of Hope's television career, his Christmas specials. What started as simple holiday-themed broadcasts soon became an annual tradition. Hope would take his crew, along with Hollywood's biggest stars, and travel the world, bringing holiday cheer to American troops stationed overseas. These specials weren't just about comedy, they were about connection. For thousands of soldiers, Bob Hope wasn't just a performer. He was a reminder of home. Yet, for all the admiration he received from audiences and servicemen, Bob Hope's personal life was far more complicated. His first marriage remains a mystery. In 1933, he quietly wed Grace Troxell, a fellow vaudeville performer. But within a year, the marriage ended, and Hope spent the rest of his life denying it ever happened. His publicists even tried to erase all records of the union. But despite his silence, he never truly left her behind. For decades, he secretly sent her financial support, right up until her death in 1976. Then there was Dolores Reed, the woman he claimed as his wife for nearly 70 years. But was their marriage even real? No official records of their wedding have ever been found. Hope always insisted they married in 1934, but legal documents suggest otherwise. Was it a publicity stunt? A cover for something else? The truth remains unclear, but one thing is certain. Dolores stayed by his side for his entire life, no matter what. And she had plenty to tolerate. Hope's reputation as a devoted family man was a carefully crafted illusion. Behind closed doors, he was a notorious womanizer. His list of affairs stretched across decades, involving actresses, beauty queens, and showgirls. Some were brief encounters. Others lasted for years. One of his most infamous affairs was with actress Barbara Payton. In 1949, she and Hope embarked on a whirlwind romance, but when she demanded financial support, he ended things abruptly. Hope thought he had put the scandal behind him, but in 1956, Payton, now struggling and desperate, exposed everything in an explosive tell-all interview. She painted Hope not as the lovable comedian America adored, but as a cold, ruthless man who used his power to control women. The scandal rocked Hollywood, but unlike other stars who saw their careers collapse under similar circumstances, Hope's team worked fast, shutting down press coverage and burying the story before it could do lasting damage. Still, insiders knew the truth. Hope had perfected the art of the double life. America's funny, faithful entertainer on stage, a man of indulgence behind the scenes. But for all his flaws, there was one thing about Bob Hope that no one could deny. He had built a career unlike any other. He had conquered radio, film, television, and even war zones. He had influenced generations of comedians. He had made history. Yet, as time passed, even legends fade. And Bob Hope, once the most celebrated entertainer in the world, would soon face the reality of an industry that had moved on. On screen, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby were the perfect pair. Two wisecracking buddies who seemed inseparable, always laughing, always looking out for one another. But behind the scenes, their relationship wasn't as warm as Hollywood made it seem. Crosby, the smooth, effortless crooner, often looked down on Hope's brand of rapid-fire, self-deprecating humor. To him, Hope was just another comic, talented, but not in his league. While Hope admired Crosby's musical ability and natural charisma, he also resented it. Deep down, he knew he could never match Crosby's success as a singer. It was an unspoken tension that grew over the years, fed by competition and bruised egos. Their biggest fight came in 1947. The road to films were wildly successful, but Crosby was making nearly twice what Hope was earning. Hope, never one to settle for second place, demanded equal pay. He threatened to walk away from the franchise if Paramount didn't level the playing field. The studio had a dilemma. Crosby was the bigger name, but without Hope, the road to movies wouldn't work. In the end, Hope won, securing equal billing and salary. But the damage was done. Crosby saw Hope's demand as arrogance, and Hope saw Crosby's reluctance as proof that he had never truly respected him. Despite the tension, they continued working together, keeping up the act for the cameras. They knew that audiences saw them as best friends, and breaking that illusion would be bad for business. Publicly, they traded friendly jabs, appearing at events with their usual banter. But when the cameras were off, they went their separate ways. Their families never spent time together, and in private, Crosby rarely spoke of Hope at all. But Crosby's issues extended beyond his professional rivalry with Hope. For years, he was known as Hollywood's cool, detached gentleman, private, quiet, always in control. But those who knew him best told a different story. His children, especially his son Gary Crosby, later revealed the darker side of their father. In a 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way, Gary described growing up under Bing's strict and often harsh parenting. According to Gary, Crosby was a cold and distant father who ruled with an iron fist. He expected perfection, and when his children fell short, they faced his wrath. Punishments were severe, sometimes crossing the line into abuse. When the book was released, it sent shockwaves through Hollywood. This was not the Bing Crosby the world knew. For decades, he had been seen as the ultimate family man, a devoted husband, a charming father, a picture-perfect symbol of mid-century American values. The revelation that he was anything but shattered that image. Some defended him, claiming Gary exaggerated his experiences, while others who had known Crosby privately confirmed the book's accounts. Hope, too, had worked tirelessly to maintain his carefully crafted public image. He built his career on being the wholesome, quick-witted comedian, the devoted family man, the entertainer who always put his audience first. But, like Crosby, the reality was much more complicated. Both men had carefully managed PR teams, people whose job was to make sure their reputations stayed intact. Scandals were covered up, negative press was silenced, and the world was given only the version of Hope and Crosby that Hollywood wanted them to see. But their story isn't unique. Hollywood has always been a place where image is everything. Friendships are often manufactured, rivalries are hidden behind forced smiles, and public personas rarely match private realities. Hope and Crosby were just one example of this carefully constructed illusion. Even today, their partnership continues to influence modern comedy duos. From Abbott and Costello to Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, from Key and Peele to today's late-night hosts, the Hope and Crosby formula remains a blueprint for comedic chemistry. But what audiences rarely realize is how often these legendary partnerships come with their own behind-the-scenes tensions. Bob Hope and Bing Crosby may have been one of the greatest duos in entertainment history, but their real relationship was far more complicated than the world was led to believe. And as time went on, their paths would only continue to drift further apart. For more than 2 decades, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby were one of the most beloved comedy duos in Hollywood. Their road to films had made them icons, but by the early 1960s, the magic was wearing thin. In 1962, they attempted a comeback with Road to Hong Kong, but something was different this time. Their longtime co-star, Dorothy Lamour, was replaced in the lead role by a younger actress, Joan Collins. The decision didn't sit well with fans, nor with Lamour, who had been an essential part of the franchise. She was eventually given a small role, but the damage was done. The film failed to capture the same energy as their earlier collaborations. The world was changing. Hollywood's golden age was ending, and the road to films, once cutting-edge and hilarious, now felt outdated. The counterculture movement, the rise of younger, edgier comedians, and the shift in audience tastes meant that Hope and Crosby's brand of comedy was no longer what it once was. The film underperformed, and despite occasional talks of another sequel, it never happened. That was the end of the road. As time passed, Hope and Crosby saw less and less of each other. By the 1970s, their careers had taken very different paths. Hope remained a television staple, still performing USO tours and appearing in holiday specials. Crosby, on the other hand, had largely stepped away from Hollywood, focusing on his love for golf and family life. Then, in October 1977, Bing Crosby collapsed suddenly after finishing a round of golf in Spain. He was 74. His death shocked the world, but perhaps even more surprising was Bob Hope's reaction, or lack of one. Despite decades of working together, Hope barely acknowledged Crosby's passing. No grand tribute, no heartfelt statement, just a brief, detached remark to the press. "He was a great partner," Hope said. And that was it. To those who had believed the illusion of their friendship, it was a strange moment. Two men who had made a career out of playing best friends, yet when one was gone, the other barely seemed to notice. Some wondered if Hope still harbored resentment over their years of rivalry. Others believed that, true to his nature, Hope simply didn't dwell on sentimentality. Whatever the reason, his silence spoke volumes. As the years wore on, Hope continued performing, but he was now a relic of another time. He remained active in entertainment, hosting television specials and making guest appearances, but the world had moved on. The slapstick charm of the road to films belonged to a bygone era. Even so, his commitment to the USO never wavered. In 1990, at the age of 87, Hope traveled to Saudi Arabia to entertain American troops during Operation Desert Shield. It would be his final tour, marking the end of nearly 50 years of performing for the military. By the late 1990s, Hope was one of the last surviving legends of classic Hollywood. In 1999, the Library of Congress honored him by opening the Bob Hope Gallery, a permanent tribute to his contributions to entertainment and American culture. Then, in 2003, Bob Hope reached a milestone that few ever do: his 100th birthday. Tributes poured in from across the world. Celebrations were held in his honor, and even after a century of life, his signature humor was still intact. When asked where he wanted to be buried, he simply replied, "Surprise me." Just 2 months later, on July 27, 2003, Bob Hope passed away at his home in California. He had lived through nearly the entire 20th century, shaped Hollywood, redefined comedy, and brought laughter to millions. But in the end, he and Bing Crosby were remembered the way Hollywood wanted them to be, forever cracking jokes, forever side by side, forever the perfect comedy duo. Reality, however, had always been more complicated, and perhaps that was their greatest performance of all. Bob Hope and Bing Crosby didn't just entertain millions, they changed entertainment itself. Hope's impact on comedy was revolutionary. His quick wit, his ability to riff off an audience, and his sharp monologues laid the groundwork for the late-night format we know today. Before Johnny Carson, before David Letterman, before Jay Leno and Jimmy Kimmel, there was Bob Hope, delivering rapid-fire jokes about politics, Hollywood, and everyday life. His style wasn't just about telling jokes, it was about reacting, staying current, and keeping his material fresh. He turned the opening monologue into an art form, setting a standard that comedians still follow decades later. Crosby, on the other hand, reshaped the music industry. His smooth, effortless baritone made him the most popular singer of his generation, and his influence extended far beyond his own recordings. He pioneered the use of pre-recorded music in radio, allowing for higher quality productions that set the stage for modern broadcasting. And his Christmas specials, starting with White Christmas, became an annual tradition that inspired countless holiday programs that followed. Even today, his rendition of White Christmas remains the best-selling single of all time. Yet, despite their monumental contributions, modern audiences rarely hear their names. Hollywood has always had a short memory, constantly looking forward to the next big thing. As the years passed, the road to films, once a cultural phenomenon, became relics of a bygone era. Younger generations, raised on different styles of comedy, found the slapstick and fast-talking humor outdated. Unlike other classic comedians like Charlie Chaplin or the Marx Brothers, whose physical comedy transcended language and time, Hope and Crosby's humor relied on rapid wordplay, cultural references, and inside jokes that don't always translate to a modern audience. And then, of course, there were the scandals. Crosby's reputation was tarnished by the revelations from his son, painting him as a cold and distant father. Hope's carefully controlled image was cracked by stories of infidelity and the reality that his off-screen persona wasn't always as charming as the one he presented to the public. As society moved into a new era where entertainers were scrutinized more than ever, their legacies became complicated. But perhaps, in the end, the truth didn't matter. After Bob Hope's passing in 2003, editorial cartoonists across the country paid tribute in the best way they knew how. They drew Bing Crosby, waiting at the gates of heaven, smiling as he welcomed his old co-star with a simple, "Welcome, Bob. It sure took you long enough." It was a fitting farewell, one final act in the longest-running joke of their careers. Hope and Crosby, side by side once again, as though their friendship had never wavered. Because that's the version of their story that the world chose to remember. The endless banter, the inside jokes, the camaraderie that may have been more fiction than fact, but was no less powerful because of it. The greatest performance they ever gave wasn't in a film, on a stage, or over the radio. It was the illusion of a friendship that endured for decades, even after they were both gone. Maybe that's the real magic of Hollywood. And maybe, in the end, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby wouldn't have wanted it any other way. Bob Hope and Bing Crosby weren't just comedians, they were legends. For decades, they brought laughter to millions, defining an era of entertainment that still echoes today. But while Hollywood painted them as the best of friends, reality was far more complicated. Behind the jokes and the banter was a relationship built on rivalry, competition, and moments of true camaraderie. In the end, their greatest act wasn't in a film or on a stage, it was the illusion of an unbreakable friendship that became as iconic as the stars themselves. But what do you think? Were they genuine friends, or just two performers playing a role? Let us know in the comments. And if you love classic Hollywood, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out more untold stories of the legends who shaped entertainment history.